Okay, as we wrap up this amphibian unit, I think it's important to talk about kind of where we're at with some um, amphibians currently on the planet, because they're such an interesting niche as we're going. One of the things that's interesting is as our climate changes, which it's changing in a variety of parts of the world. Amphibians are one of the most affected organisms by the increase in temperature. This whole idea that they are kind of bound to the water, not only water, but small bodies of water, means that um, we're going to see the effects of climate changing on amphibians first before we see it in other species. So, amphibians, the canary and the coal mine for climate change. That's kind of a colloquial term or phrase there. What it's from is from the old mining days. Before they had modern technology, they would actually take canaries down as they were mining because any harmful gases that were released in the process would affect the canaries first. And so the miners knew that if the canaries started to die, then it was time to get out of the mine because there's deadly gases going on. Same thing with amphibians right now. They are going to be affected by climate first because their habitats and anatomy do not handle changes in temperature well. So they rely on wetlands and semi-wet habitats. So these little pockets of water here and there, as the earth parts of the earth start to dry up, then there are fewer of those wetlands around. They often reside in small bodies of water. Once again, you're more likely to have small ponds dry up versus Lake Superior. So they're affected by that. They have permeable, moist skin. So they themselves are damp. And so as they dry out, then that is lethal for them. In food webs, they have this central position because they eat a lot of the very small herbivores. Think about insects and worms and those kind of things. They need to reproduce in water and they're cold blooded, meaning their temperature cannot be regulated at the same rate ours can. So all of those factors means that their bodies are going to be far more susceptible to climate change than um, reptiles, birds, and mammals there. So in this process, many amphibians are currently endangered. The ones that are doing well are amphibians that have many habitat types, so they're very adaptable. Think of toads. Toads can live in a variety of places. Large, well-dispersed populations. So if the Midwest is experiencing a massive drought and a ton of frogs get killed off, it's okay. The Northeast still has plenty of this species there, and so their populations are going to be okay. And then populations that rely on big habitats, like I said, the Mississippi, um, Lake Minnetonka, Lake Superior, those kind of places aren't going anywhere. It's the smaller ponds and streams that will dry up first. So conversely, the struggling populations are ones that have smaller, isolated groups, where if an entire state's going through a drought, that could wipe out, all of that species that lives in that state. Very specific habitat types. So if they're very temperamental and on what they need to survive, they're more likely to die out. Small ecosystem dwellers, like I said, small ponds and marshy lands, those will be the first to kind of go. And then the drying out of these microhabitats, little puddles and pools that they're going to lay their tadpoles in. So why climate change affects amphibians? I've kind of talked about this a little bit, but as temps increase in parts of the world, that's going to lead to an increase in droughts and severe weather events. So we're seeing, and we talk about it in biology, we're seeing weather become more extreme. So we'll go, long periods of drought followed by massive amounts of rainstorms versus kind of a more spread out weather pattern. Um, and then one thing to keep in mind is remember, amphibians are chained to bodies of water. They need water to reproduce, so they can't just migrate across, frogs can't migrate across the United States to where the water is, whereas mammals and birds have that ability. They are stuck in their current location. So they cannot easily migrate or adapt. So that local water source, if that dries up, then the frog population is done in that area. So large populations survive better because they're spread out, less likely to lose an entire species if one area goes through drought. Right. So, and here's a look as temperatures are rising in the last several decades. This is data. This is a fact that things are warming up and drying out in general. We're a little bit sheltered from that here in the Midwest, but different parts of the world are going through it a lot worse. Okay, so if we look at the density of amphibian species, red means there's tons of different kinds of species. Blue means there's hardly any species. And so those areas that have tons of amphibian species are the ones that are facing some of the more extreme weather right now, some of the more effects of climate change. And so these populations are going to be affected first. Notice in Minnesota, we don't have very many. Interesting to look at the Arctic, no amphibian species, the desert, no amphibian species. It's these moist, warm habitats that amphibians are thrive in. Okay, so a little Venn diagram there to go through some of that. But no, I just like talking about, when we see climate change, we are using amphibians as kind of that indicator species of once those amphibian populations start to really drop, then we're going to see some more long-term effects in ecosystems. The food web gets altered there. We start losing some of those resources because we do use a lot of chemicals from amphibians and frogs in particular for genetic research, for medicine, those kind of things. So interesting look there at how the changing climate is going to affect the amphibians first.